that other students who don't get a chance to join us right now will be able to watch it later. And I will go ahead and turn the time over to Brandon.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going? It's good to be here talking to you guys today about user flows. So I'll just give a quick introduction to myself and then we'll get right into it. So again, my name is Brandon. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm actually from Jackson, Mississippi. It's actually my first year here in Georgia. It's been pretty awesome. Meeting lots of different people from various backgrounds. It's been pretty cool. And so me and myself, I've worked in product design for the last 4 to 5 years now, working with various companies. You guys ever heard of like Pandora, Spotify, Reddit, all of those? Yeah, I haven't had the chance to work with any of them yet, but I've worked with some pretty cool companies that are along the lines of like email. I've had the chance to work in marketplace style apps, food delivery apps, stuff like that. And I actually got started in communication. So I have a background in PR and communication from Mississippi State University. I have one master's in public policy. Thought I was going to become a lawyer. You know, I was thinking easy way to make money, become a lawyer. And then I realized that it wasn't as fun and glamorous as it sounds. And so I ended up switching back into kind of the creative field and got started in design. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at right now. And so the reason I wanted to kind of go over user flows with you guys is because that's actually kind of what got me inspired to become a designer. I actually started working with this startup, doing social media marketing, and I was recruited from some of the developers there to run through a couple of user flows. At the time, I didn't even know what they were. I just saw a bunch of pieces of papers kind of connected to one another. And they were pretty much asking me questions about the flow of our existing app. And I enjoyed it. And they were telling me that that's something that I should really do for a living. So I was like, never thought about that. So yeah, so I actually started diving into design through that. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we'll get right into it. Okay, assuming everyone can see my screen, right? Good to go. Okay, so yeah, today I'm gonna give you guys a quick guide on user flows. So what's the flow? Why does user flows, why do they matter, and how do we use them, right? So the first thing I'm going to get into is what are user flows? So user flows, they're a set of steps a user takes to accomplish a task. And so we use them within apps, within websites, whatever we're designing as UX designers. And so it guides your user in knowing pretty much what tasks that they're taking on. So they're visual representations. So as you can see here on the right, kind of this little detail is pretty much what a user flow is. You give the screens that you're going to be showing in an app or website, and there are a set of steps that you want them to take. So for instance, with this one, they're going from sign up to creating a new task, to filling out that task, and then seeing some kind of success message or whatever. And so basically, there are interactions that a user follows to complete a goal. And you as a designer, you have what that goal is in mind, and user flows help to validate basically what you think that the user's journey should look like within a particular task. And so, so why do we use user flows? User flows are very important to the UX design process. The first thing that we look at, look at the word UX. Basically, it's the user experience. And so your user is always key, no matter what. And so user flows help to validate everything from the experience. So you have certain parts that are just the design parts, and then you have the overall experience. Well, user flow focuses on the actual experience. Because remember, again, your user's experience is what you need to keep in mind. You're designing with the user in mind. You're not trying to show off a whole bunch of design skills or show off the latest design trends that you've seen on Dribble or Behance all the time. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good to kind of go and explore and be creative with design. But even when you're designing, the big thing that you want to keep in mind is the user, is the overall experience beneficial to your user. And so user flows, they show decision points for the user to interact with. And so let's say, for example, you have an app. And with that app, the user is going to go through different decision points on any given page. So from Apple's App Store app, you'll have different decision points that a user can make. You have the account, they can click on, your profile account or whatever. You can click on different apps and it goes and it flows through. Basically, user flow shows those steps. Another important aspect of why we use user flows is for communication. Keep in mind, one thing that you're doing when you're designing is you're communicating with other people that aren't designers. And so that can be key stakeholders, so that could be investors or anyone else within a company that you're working for, especially developers. And so showing out a user flow and how you want the entire experience to be laid out is very good for communicating your ideas, especially for developers. I use user flows whenever I'm doing a developer handoff. So I show the developer where exactly the next screen should be, because that's usually one of the questions that developers will have. They'll say, okay, I see these set of static screens, but where are they leading to? If a user clicks here, where is it going? If a user clicks in this area, where is it going? Where is it leading them? And so user flows help to communicate that. They also help to identify gaps within design. So when you lay out an entire user flow, you want to keep in mind that they're just screens. They're your design screens that you've laid out. And a lot of times within those design screens, you come across different things that you hadn't thought about. Some of those things could be empty states, right? So let's say a user clicks on a set of tasks, or let's say you have a task app, right? But a user hasn't set a single task yet. So what does that empty state look like? What does it look like when they have no task set versus when they have one or two tasks set? Normally as designers, we'll design for the perfect case, which is usually just those set of tasks already set on the screen. But a lot of times we never think about what happens if the user has never set anything. So being able to see that through user flows kind of helps fill those gaps. Also, it helps with identifying screens that are needed. Maybe you didn't remember one of the screens that is shown inside of the design. And a lot of times developers will usually point that out, or anyone else within a company. They'll say, okay, I see this search bar. What happens when a user clicks there? Where does it go? Where does the next screen look like? And so user flow helps to keep those screens in order. It basically helps you to see the overall experience, the overall, pretty much the overall experience as a whole. So it helps identify those different gaps, and it helps to focus on the overall experience, like I said. Because I found myself designing for different people, and I even forget some of the some screens. And through user flows, I am usually able to identify which screens I'm missing. A lot of times it's just stuff that you just don't think about while you're designing. And so when you're coming up with user flows and you're connecting the different screens and you're showing the different decision points, those gaps can be filled and the overall experience can be enhanced. So a question I get sometimes is, what's the difference in a user flow and a wireframe? Well, basically, a wireframe kind of sets out what you want your initial design to look like. And so it kind of helps you with the UI side of things. And so, like if you're designing an app and you want to make sure that you have a login screen and a sign up screen, a wireframe is going to kind of show different elements that are going to be needed on the screen, pretty much usually in a low fidelity way. You're not going to typically have the entire screen laid out in a wireframe. You're just going to kind of have little blocks and areas that you want to have a button or something like that in. But a user flow is usually going to be more high fidelity stuff that shows off the actual experience. So a user flow is usually going to be like your finished screens, different screens that you've come up with for your app or for your website, and showing the different touch points. So, you know, again, like I said, from point A to point B, if a user selects here, which screen is it going to? If a user selects here, what screen is it going to? Or if a user swipes, what screen is it going to after they swipe? Or whatever kind of interaction that you want the user to go through. So user flows, I would say, focuses more so on the experience, while wireframes focus more so on the UI side of things. Now, I'm going to actually kind of give like a short demonstration of user flow in practice. So I'm going to go to Sketch here, and we're just going to create just a quick, simple app, just so we can go through the actual user flow of it. So here, I will, let's do an iPhone, just because that's typically the norm. And let's do a quick coffee app, right? So your user, you basically want them to be able to order coffee. So we're gonna insert a quick profile here. Let's make this a little smaller. Let's insert our coffee cup. And let's create a button. And so essentially, this is what we just want the user to be able to do. Let's pick a good font here. SF Pro, just because it's what Apple uses. It's standard. Let's give our button a nice little round corner here. Yeah, it looks good. Let's increase the size, maybe to about 20. All right, let's make this about 100 from the bottom, 125 here. And let's give our button some kind of color, just to jazz it up a little bit. Let's go green. And so we'll call this our initial screen. And so let's create a second screen here. Same size. And on this screen, we want to keep the same coffee cup here. We'll make it a little bit smaller. We'll let the user choose the size. And we'll say they can choose, I'm not going to go completely Starbucks here. We'll just say small, medium, and large. We don't have to say like grande and venti and all the other stuff that they use. Let's round this out as well. Probably gonna have to make this a little bit smaller just so we can fit all three options on here. And so we'll have our selected one be blue. With a my text. Let's make this rectangle a little bit smaller. And our text a little smaller. Too small. Okay. This looks better. So it's 76. 8. 14. Let's make these about 40 from each other. So yeah, we'll allow the user to choose the size and maybe a quantity as well. And we'll just say, yeah, we'll let them choose this as well. Flip this. And we'll throw in a number here. Let's just say 2. And then we'll let them choose the, I guess, the type. Not sure if that's what it's called, but whether they want like hot or cold, maybe. So do this, make this a lot smaller. So yeah, we'll let them choose which one they want, hot or cold. And then we'll call this the order screen. And then our last one that we'll do is just the payment screen. So we'll allow our users to pay. And so let's say they already have a card set here. Make this a little smaller. Let's add another button. We'll just say pay for order. Center this. Looks good. And then let's put in, let's just create some back buttons here, just so our user can always go back. It's maybe too big, but we'll rock with it. Let's call this back button. All right, so we pretty much have the screens that we want to use. It's not perfect, but you know, for the sake of time, this is what we'll use here, right? And so now we'll get this into a user flow. Now, what I normally use is called overflow, It's just a program that allows me to take sketch screens and create some type of user flow with them. And let's name this pay screen. So what I do is I have to click on these screens and I go into overflow and then I sync them to overflow. Let's just call this coffee order, save it to the desktop. Okay, so here it is in overflow. Actually, probably should do a background color. Sorry about that. Call this background. Yeah, that looks good. We'll add it to each one of these screens, save it again, and then we'll sync it back again. Okay. So now we should have our screens here in overflow. And so now all we have to do is create our user flow. So from this screen, let's say we want the start order to go to this screen. And so we set that pinpoint. And then from this screen, the user goes here. Now, intentionally, I left out an actual button here on the order screen because how else would you get to the pay? And so without this user flow, that may have been something that I didn't notice until I created this. So now we see that there's a gap between this order screen and the pay screen here. And so I can go back, I can create another button. And it'll be, let's just say go to pay. Save it. Sync this screen back to overflow. And now in overflow, I have it here. And now we can say that when the user clicks on this, they go to pay and they're good to go. And now let's say if the user clicks on back, they want to come back here. And so we can play around with how we have this set. And we can change that connector style. I usually change it to a dotted line to let the user know that they're going back. That's just a personal preference of mine. So yeah, pretty much overflow is a great example of how to use a user flow. And so from this, you can see that this is just, I mean, it's just a very basic overflow or a user flow, but you can see how it'll be beneficial to our users for the overall experience. So you see that from this screen, you want your user to start an order, they go here, they make their different selections, and then they go to pay, and they're able to pay, and they click on pay for order, and then we'll have another screen for where did they land next. But all of this is done through user flows. So again, it keeps the user experience in mind. This is really great for communicating your ideas, your screens, like the different designs that you've come up with. You can show them back to developers on how the app should flow itself, or anyone else that's a key stakeholder that needs to see the different screens and whatnot. And yeah, you can definitely see like the different user interactions. And so yeah, that's pretty much an overview of user flows. I'll leave the rest up to questions from you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. Our first question is from Alexander, who asks, how would you show an animation on a user flow?
It's actually a really good question. Okay. So animations are really different. I don't know if we actually have a tool that links different animations to one another. The best way would be to create some type of prototype and just kind of show your animations in an interaction. Like I said, more so in an interactive prototype. So show what happens when you're going from point A to point B. And Overflow and like Sketch and a few others, they don't really allow for you to create the user flow with an interactive prototype. So kind of stuck a little bit there, but I mean, I'd say try doing it in an interactive prototype where you show each step pretty much prototyped out. If
Cool.
that answers your question, yeah, that's the best answer I have for that one.
Awesome. Alexander also asked, when it comes to multiple users, do you make one big user flow or break it down for each user type?
I'd say break it down to make it a little bit easier. I would say for your user flows, try to keep them pretty linear, going from step A to step B, step C, on out. And then for that one user, and then for the next user, kind of do the same thing. Because if you map them all in one, you kind of get more into what's considered, like user mapping, which is essentially the same thing as user flow. But user flow, you typically just want to go in like a linear motion. You can do some branches, so you can show like if one point or one button takes you to like two screens or something like that, you can kind of do like a branch and show like which two screens it would user would land on. But yeah, definitely for multiple users or use cases or whatever, I'd say do multiple user flows.
Nice. And Mark asks if you have a favorite alternative or alternatives to Overflow. Anything else you might use?
Yeah, there's a few plugins that you can use for Sketch, or you can make your own. You can make your own like symbols inside of Sketch, and just kind of those symbols just be arrows, and just link them to different screens. I think another one is called FlowKit. It's made by a guy named Matt Smith, I believe is his name. And he's actually from here in Georgia as well. He's a pretty known designer. MDS, if anyone ever follows him on Twitter or anything like that. Yeah, I think he came up with a Sketch plugin called FlowKit, which is another good one.
Cool. And in that note, Alexander asks if you have other favorite Sketch add-ons, plugins that you use.
There are quite a few. Mostly dealing with like things I don't want to go find, which are like pictures or photos, images, anything like that. So I have the Unsplash plugin. I think you guys saw me use the faces one for like generating just a random face for a user profile. That's another one of my favorites. Let me actually look at my Sketch to see what other plugins I have. Those are typically the two that I use the most. And then Zeppelin. I use Zeppelin just to do developer handoffs so that developers can get specs of my different design screens. The good thing about Overflow is that you can actually share it easily to your team, and it kind of shares it out like similar to like a PDF style. It gives them one big screen that has like all the different flows, and they can see everything. They can comment and things like that. So those are probably my top plugins for Sketch.
Cool. And Graham is asking, what do you feel is the difference between a sitemap and a user flow?
So sitemap, pretty much you don't necessarily or won't necessarily make it high fidelity as a user flow. User flow, like I said, usually is going to be like your in-game screen, like what you want your actual screens to look like. and then creating the flows between that. Usually with a sitemap, you're just kind of showing different pages of an app or different pages within a website that that users will go to, but they're not necessarily high fidelity. They can just be square blocks that say home screen, and then it has like a link to whatever screens that they can go to from the home page and whatnot. Again, it's not as high fidelity, and it doesn't show interactions as much. User flow shows pretty much each interaction that a user would entail from that screen. Yeah, if that answers your question.
Cool. Another question is, what tools are great for working with other UX designers on a team in collaboration? Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, Sketch. They just added Teams as a beta right now. I haven't had the chance to use it, but I hear from a few designers because I use Sketch just in my daily flow, so them having the capability to add other designers in collaboration should be really good. Of course, Figma is a big one for most people. Figma makes it really easy for you to collaborate with other designers, for other stakeholders to kind of check on your different designs. They can add comments and stuff like that. And it shows the different specs for developers as well. Not sure if XD allows for multiple designers to work in the same flow. But I mean, XD is still a really good tool, but I'd say if you are working with multiple designers and you guys kind of want to work at the same time, Figma is probably the top tool for that. And if Sketch, if their new beta is anything like that, then yeah, I'd say those two. Hopefully Sketch is similar to Figma, because Figma, they pretty much hit the nail on the head with collaborating with other designers.
Yeah, nice. Alexander asks also, any common mistakes that you see user experience designers do when using user flows, making user flows?
Usually it's pretty much forgetting different screens. They'll forget to either upload one of the screens or something like that. Like, it may not be missing entirely, but they may forget to sync it from the design page or something like that. Also, not really thinking out the different use cases ahead of time before designing. Again, user flows, they help with figuring out certain use cases, but a lot of use cases you should probably think about ahead of time before you even begin designing. Again, through using like sitemaps and wireframes, things like that. Yeah, I've seen that a lot of times where they just won't think out certain buttons that may be needed, like a back button sometimes. A user lands on a screen and can't go back. And so then they're just kind of stuck on that screen, which of course, if you're a user and you get stuck on the screen and you can't go back or you can't go forward, makes for a terrible experience, and you're probably not going to use that app again. Like, you're probably going to hit the delete button. So
yeah, that's really the case. Juanita just said a comment that she said, "This is amazing. Unfortunately, I don't design, but this is so cool to witness." So nice. And then Graham asks, how do you present user flows to designers and developers versus non-tech stakeholders? Is there a difference for you?
Overflow kind of helps with that gap between those that actually understand what's going on and those that may not understand some of it. Usually the only thing I'll change is some of the jargon. I try not to use as much design jargon that I would with most designers and developers and stuff. Try to put things as simple as possible so that maybe, like, they always say, try to make it to where like a third grader would understand it, right? And so I try to do that typically in any kind of meeting, whether I'm working with other designers or not. I think user flows kind of help that because, again, you're just kind of showing links of different interactions. And so it kind of, it simplifies things, paints a visual picture. I think people follow along very well to seeing little lines that connect, like, everyone, it's kind of, kind of paints the picture like this goes here,
Cool. Kevin asks, how does user flow presentation differ when it's improving an existing process versus creating an original one? Like, do you have a side-by-side comparison, or is there anything?
Uh, I actually did forget to mention this in the presentation, but a lot of times that's the best thing about user flows is that you can use them from original design. So starting from square one with an app and showing the entire app itself, or you can use it also just to reiterate new features. And so typically showing new features, you're just going to make it much smaller. You're just going to try to hone in on just that feature. So let's say you're implementing a new chat feature into an app. You would only show like those screens that pertain to that feature versus having to show the entire picture. So a lot of times it's actually more clear. It's easy to understand that way to see like a new feature being implemented into an app because you're only focusing on just that feature. So a lot of times trying to explain why you would need that feature or how the feature would benefit your user. Sometimes it comes across better just showing that feature in a user flow versus trying to add that to like the existing entire picture of the entire app. Yeah, that's that's what I'd say with that.
Right on. So another question, do you start with pencil and paper for user flows and then move to a vector app, or are there pros and cons, or what's your process?
I'm guilty of not using pen and paper. I know a lot of designers do. Me personally, I just kind of like to jump straight in. As even when I was in school and whatnot, I've always been a visual learner. And so for me, I just go directly into my design tools. I start designing, I start just sketching out different things. And then from there, I look to see what works, what doesn't work. And then I start to plan them inside of a user flow. So I start to do it in overflow, and then I'll just add and sync up different screens as I go. But yeah, I'm actually guilty of not going pen and paper first. I know a lot of designers that do. For a lot of people, it actually helps them to see things, you know, on paper before they actually put them out into a design tool. For some people, it just saves some time and headache. But for me, I like to see all my different designs laid out. Just, I come up with different ideas when I can see them laid out in Sketch sometimes.
Awesome. Joanne asks, when and how often do you do iterations on user flows?
Typically pretty often. I know with most of the clients that I've worked with, we're always, you're always going to improve an app or your website. And so that can be improving existing designs that you have already or, iterating new features. And so, you're always improving. And so, you're going to always update your user flows. It's just an ongoing process.
Okay. Alexander asks, what creative outlet do you do? For example, do you draw, paint, etc.? Do you have anything you'd be willing to share?
Outside of just, product design, I do photography. I actually used to do product photography for an ad agency about 5 or 6 years ago. Photography. I wish I could paint and draw. Like it's always been. I love seeing drawings and stuff, especially like what people are creating with Procreate and iPad Pros now. Like it's ridiculous, but I can trace. Like crazy. But no, I can't. I'm not as original when it comes to like drawing and stuff. But I do love I get inspired by others' drawings and art and stuff like that. Like even this painting here, one of my friends, she's an artist. She painted that. So I get inspired by others, but no, I don't do any of that. Just photography.
Nice. Let's see. Graham is asking, what are developers looking for in user flows? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. So typically developers that I work with, they're needing to know next steps. Because typically when they're developing the different screens, they're just doing some kind of basic interaction over to, the next screen. Basically, they're doing just like basic screen flows, and a lot of times they'll have questions like, okay, so what happens when the user clicks on this button, or what happens when the user swipes here? So user flow really kind of helps them to see that, because typically when you're designing and you upload different designs to developers, they don't know the actual flow of everything. They just see static screens, they build them, and then their next questions are, okay, how does this screen connect to this screen? Like, where are the connections here? And so user flow really helps them to understand the connections. If you can do both as a handoff to developers, it really helps them out. So not only just handing off the screens, so that they can see the different design specs, but also seeing the user flows so they can see that how screens connect will cause less headache for you, and less headache for them as well. So you definitely want to collaborate with your developers as much as possible. Ask them questions very often.
Do you start with some sort of written spec, like a set of user stories, or do you just use a general creative brief? Do you think one is better than the other? Or do you like to dive into the UI flow and explore?
Yeah, so I'll go with the creative brief just to see the overall, like overall objective of what's needed. But typically, whoever created the design brief or whatever you're doing, they don't think out. They don't necessarily have everything thought out as far as the different use cases and different users and stuff like that will be using this app or using certain feature and whatnot. So I usually take whatever the objectives are, and then I kind of dive in myself, and I'll create like different user stories, why certain users would be using this, who's going to be using this, or do a little user research as well. Yeah, I pretty much take the overall picture and then just kind of break it down as I go into little mini steps.
Cool. We've come to the end of our questions thread. Oh, here, another one just appeared. Do you use user persona to create a flow?
Yeah, user personas definitely help to create your user flow because, again, you want to understand your users as much as possible when creating the overall experience. And so, yeah, having an understanding of who your users are, why they'd be using this app or, again, this feature or whatever it is that you're designing, having that understanding first helps you to develop a better user experience, pretty much.
What do you like most about product design, just in general?
I love seeing users using different products that I've had a hand in creating. I love getting feedback, both negative and positive. It helps me as a designer. A lot of times, as a designer, you don't think of everything, and you never will have all of the answers. And so just that user feedback a lot of times helps you to, think about certain things that you may not have thought about, or to reiterate on some ideas that you thought were really good, but, could use some kind of improvements and stuff. So for me, that's always the best thing. I love getting feedback.
Awesome. Well, that's the end of the questions right now. Let's maybe give one last call for questions. Here comes one. Might be off topic. He says, but how do you go about gathering user research when you have no incentive, especially when your users are hard to contact, like government officials, research, etc.? I think for incentive, you meaning being able to pay people to participate.
Right.
Have any thoughts there?
Twitter or any kind of social media. A lot of times just kind of going on social media. Twitter is usually an easy one. You can just kind of ask questions out there and just get different perspectives. You can start polls on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot. Just kind of get different answers from, random people. Yeah, because a lot of times you aren't able to just go out and just pay different, different people for research and whatnot, especially when working on government work. A lot of times you can't even talk about the government work that you are working on. So Yeah, I'd say just kind of use different resources such as social media, not really giving people the broad picture of what you're working on, but just kind of asking generic questions just to get some kind of insight.
Awesome. Any other questions from anybody?
Came up as a question from a fellow student is when you are presenting to a stakeholder or you're doing the user testing on your user flows and questions arise about the project, and some of it may be about the research or some of it may be more about the project, how do you essentially handle dealing with who answers what type of questions?
I'd say if it's usually dealing with a design presentation, I try to answer as many questions as possible, being the designer for the project. But if I feel that some questions are better left for someone a little higher up or someone that understands the broader picture, usually it's a project manager or someone of that kind of status that will kind of step in and answer any of those questions. But typically as a designer, you can, or me, myself, I try to answer as many questions as possible. And yeah, if I don't know, I'll usually direct it to a project manager. Sometimes it's the developer, because a lot of things usually come down to functionality. So seeing the different interactions and stuff, like a lot of questions someone may have a question on functionally, how does this look or how does this work and stuff like that. And so usually it'll go over to a developer or still sometimes project manager. Project manager usually kind of has the broad picture of, the entire overview of the scope of the project, and they'll have some skills in development or design and all of that, and they can usually answer the questions sometimes better than me.
I wonder if you'd talk a little bit more about the designer and developer handoff relationship, like how you work with developers. A lot of our students are currently in the process of actually working together, developers working with designers, and I think it'd be good to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, communication is key. Talk to developers as often as possible. Usually it's going to be on functionality. So when you're designing, always think about functionally, can this work? Or how long will this take a developer to build? And is it worth taking that long to build something versus, maybe reiterating your design, making it a little more simpler, something easier for them to code, maybe just nothing super crazy. So yeah, definitely communicate with them as often as possible because they'll let you know, usually they'll let you know, I'll say, kind of time-wise, like what they're looking at, how functional a certain design is and whatnot. Yeah, collaborate with them as much as possible during the design process, and then also continue to work with them even after the developer handoff has been made. So after you've given them screens and they can see the specs and stuff like that, continue to work with them. See if they have any questions, because a lot of times developers will also help out with different use cases of a user and whatnot, certain things that you may not have thought about. Yeah.
Great. We just got a couple of minutes left. Does anyone else have any additional questions you'd like to ask Brandon while we have him with us?
I do. We have students who are going into build week, and a lot of times what they find is they have to simplify their design, and you talked about that, but how do you go about simplifying, like what are, I guess, the broadest and easiest ways to simplify your design, and then what are the next sort of level? So what would you say the top 3 things you look at when someone tells you it's too complex?
Usually if someone tells me it's too complex, it hurts a little bit because typically it's because as a designer, sometimes we try to be very creative with our designs, but creativity may not necessarily, add up to functionality. And so what I do in that case is I usually try to find a balance between my creativity and then also just kind of what's native to whatever you're designing for. So whether you're designing for Android or Apple or whatever, kind of look at what they're already doing and, either meet in the middle somewhere of the creativity versus like what's already natively out there. So those things that are native are usually, you know, a developer has those, they know how to build it, it's quick. Apple and Google themselves, they've already have the tools for them there. But you know, sometimes you can reiterate on some of those things.
Great. So Branden, is there a way that folks can get a hold of you or follow you on some social media or anything like that?
Sure, yeah. I'm big on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is Wagsay. It's WAGGSAY. That's pretty much the only place I'm at. I'm also on Dribble as well. So if you ever need design inspiration or anything like that, you can find me on Dribble at Hello Branden, HELLOBRANDEN. I'm not really on Facebook like that. I try to stay away from Facebook, and I mean, you know, we all try to stay away from everything Facebook. You can't really avoid it most times, but I try not to go on there as much. But I'm pretty active on Twitter. I'm always open to answering any questions about design. And if I don't know the answer, I definitely know a bunch of people within the industry and all that can, you know, answer any of those questions.
Ooh, so
Awesome.
that comes to the shameless request is we're always looking for mentors. Any suggestions on how to find mentors? And could you repeat your Twitter handle, please?
Yeah. I'm sorry. My Twitter handle is Wagsay, WAGGSAY. The best way to find mentors is, you know, really not being afraid to ask. Connecting with other designers that have the experience and have been out there in the field. Just ask them. Most of the time, they'll be happy to help out or at least point you in the right direction of someone that can really kind of you know, guide you along as a mentor.
Awesome. Branden, we really appreciate your time today and what you shared with us about user flows. Thanks a bunch. And we will call it a day for now and let you go.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.